And last but not least, we're going to talk about the Open Bank project. And so Simon, CEO, founder, my boss, will talk about Open Bank project and try to get you through a technical deep dive, so really getting into the nitty-gritty details of the Open Bank project, how it works, what it comes with, and why it is so cool. And hopefully you'll have time for questions as well. So Simon, with that, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ismail. Hi folks, good afternoon. Do you want to come forward a bit maybe? Or is that really risky? Oh no, some people are moving forward. That's good. Since it's nice. How many people have used a REST API? Like how many people know like curl and all that sort of stuff? Okay, cool. Good. So we probably won't need that much time because it's late in the day and everything. But I'll take you through. So yeah, we're an open source API for banks. I'll explain the open source thing a bit. So we dual license our software under the AGPL and commercial licenses. So the AGPL is the Afro new public license, and that's the kind of strict open source license. So, if you take it and you modify it and you're exposing your services to X people, then X people should be able to see that source code and therefore and download it. And this is like, it's basically the original license that Linux and Postgres and all those cool projects use, updated for the web. And yeah, and if banks don't want to use the commercial license, they want an exemption from it, so they want to be able to fork the source code, modify it to their heart's content, and not put it back onto GitHub or not expose it on the interweb, as it were. Then they pay us a commercial license, and then also they can for that commercial license they get community building and commercial support from us, and so on. Right, and some of the other tools, so there's also an API Explorer, which is like a vertical banking specific API Explorer, and an app we called Sophie, stands for Social Finance, utility app that's also similarly dual license under the AGPL and commercial licenses. And then there are SDKs which are like MIT or Apache licensed. So we have an ecosystem of apps. We have something over 5,500 plus developers who are building apps and services, and yeah, they've come through working with us on hackathons and innovation programs over the last few years. So I think I first kind of pitched this whole open banking idea, open banking APIs, to an IT conference in Berlin in February 2010. And shortly after that, well, we started writing the source code in 2011, and then in 2013 we were incubated up here at the Fintech Innovation Lab. We held an early hackathon there, and yeah, so through these events and then more kind of bigger innovation programs, we've got a whole bunch of developers who are building apps and services. So some of them here, Momentum is a business analytics tool, Money Garden's a PFM. This app, Money Journey, was developed at a hackathon in Brazil, actually at a hackathon organized by Transparency International. Gothic view on this was the proof of concept we did for a bank, and then there's yeah, social finance, which is a current thing that we do, and that's kind of showing some of the transparency ideas that we have. So basically, a core part of Open Bank project is that you shouldn't just assume the owner view of accounts and transactions. So imagine an account holder wants to share with their accountant, their auditor, or a company wants to share with their shareholders, or charity with donors, or even even the public, right? So right from the start, we have the concept of views in Open Bank project. So a bit like I used to be a Oracle DBA and blah blah blah, and PL SQL developer. So I've done lots of relational database stuff. So in databases you have these views, select X, Y, Z from table instead of all the columns, and views give the same kind of fine-grained access that you have on accounts and transactions and so on. There's another subsystem in Open Bank project which is to do with metadata. If you think about tags or comments, URLs, this kind of stuff that you want to add to transactions or counterparties, then that metadata can be added, but it's not added to the core banking system. It's added to a database that is under the hood of Open Bank project. It can run behind the database, can be behind the firewall, no problem. But you don't have to touch the core banking system, basically. And we link this metadata using transaction IDs or counterparty IDs, this kind of thing. And the idea is that all the apps can actually leverage this metadata as well. So you might have one app which is really good at geocoding. So they would use our geocoding APIs, but we don't provide, right now we don't provide back-end services to do geocoding, but maybe there's a third-party app service that wants to do that geocoding, and then the account holder can effectively pay for that service, or the bank can pay for that, and so on and so forth. So so Open Bank project is more than just getting access to raw transaction data, for instance. You can also initiate payments and so on, and then there is a bunch of APIs to do with onboarding, KYC, this kind of stuff. So here's the stack, as it were. So all the orange stuff is stuff that comes from Open Bank project. So this is on GitHub, and it's Scala and some Java code. So what do we have? So this tiny little box here is a core banking system, and authentication system. So we have a connector layer here. So the basic idea is that wherever you install the Open Bank project, it's installed at the bank's data center, so behind their firewalls and so on and so forth. And wherever it's installed, you get the same APIs, and we abstract away all the differences between the different core banking systems. Now, when I say we, I mean whoever's installing that at the bank. So right now we have 3 core banking POCs going on, and we are actually doing. In one of them, we're doing all the work. So we're writing. So we have there's actually another kind of layer here. There's a Java library here which abstracts away the Kafka message queue. There's a message queue here, Kafka message queue, and then on the south side, you can either consume the messages in the raw or use one of our libraries, and then make calls to the core banking system on the south side. So one of the POCs we're doing at the moment, we are writing this stuff, so we're calling internal SOAP services, for instance, and in the other 2, the banks are doing it themselves. So they're asking us for support and tweaking this and tweaking that, but basically they're writing this bit. This is where we store our metadata and fine-grained entitlements and developer keys and all that kind of stuff. Actually, one of the banks has asked us to separate this further. So we're now writing some ACA code, which means that this can be on another machine. So basically, more layers of separation between the layers for security purposes. So we have the raw kind of banking data here, the metadata, the entitlements, and so on, and of course all the API management stuff. And then this gets, depending on who you're logged in as, this gets moderated, so you can only see what you're allowed to see. So the account owner can see everything, but the accountant would typically see a subset of that. We're using OAuth out of the box, so we have an OAuth 10A server within the Open Bank project. If anyone who saw Stevie Graham's talk the other day will have noted the difference between OAuth 10A and OAuth 2, and that difference between those two protocols is precisely why we have not gone down the OAuth 2 route, because we don't think it's as secure as OAuth 1. At least for a small startup like us, we want to be like kind of squeaky clean and sure of what we're using. But we've also written a connector out to OpenID, so we can get user information from an OpenID provider. So we have the API Explorer up here, which I'll show you in a bit, and obviously there's the test suite and so on. Yeah. Any questions so far? Questions so far? Is it all clear? Yeah.
How does it work if, I mean, you're provided the authentication layer, but my thought is that maybe banks are going to request that the API uses the authentication layer.
Yeah.
How can you make that work?
Yeah. So as I just mentioned, we just started some work on that with OpenID Connect. Actually, that's being tested by one of the banks that we're working with right now. And it's always been in the plan to support external OAuth server or other server. So that's it's kind of in the works, as it were. Yeah. But the internal OAuth server has been great because it's just, it's easy to use for any of our events and POCs and hackathons and so on and so forth. We also have another simpler authentication method we call direct login, and that's basically using it's a point-to-point thing. There's no linking around and stuff, and then the developer gets back a JWT token, which then they can use further. So we've used that for hackathons and stuff, but you could also imagine it might be used for a server-side app. So the authentication thing is something that we will develop further as well. In addition to the core API, there's a new Java library which is used here, and that can be used to test connectors here independently of the rest of the stack. So the Scala code imports this Java library, and that library is also kind of transport independent. So we'll be able to use other message queues here and message format independent. So you can use the standard message format that we have, or you can roll your own as well. And that's also AGPL licensed on GitHub, so that's called OVP-JVM. Then we have a bunch of SDKs, and they so these are primarily used for making the OAuth pain slightly more bearable. So like OAuth 10A, you know, it's a little bit picky, right? Or, well, it's crypto, so it has to be exactly right. So, you know, if you've got, you know, a URL slightly wrong, it won't work. So we provide these SDKs which help with that. They have a range of maturity, right? So the iOS one is probably the most mature and nicely done. A good mate of mine is an iOS developer and he spent quite a bit of time on it, so it's really nice. Some are done by ourselves, and actually there's the C#, which is not there, which is done by one of the startups who uses Open Bank Project. Yeah, and there's some simple ones in Python and Node and so on and so forth. This is part of Sophie, or the utility app. So whenever there's an Open Bank Project instance kicking around, there's probably an instance of this. It's also Scala running in typically Jetty or something like that, and just running on a different port. So this is Sophie. So you can here see that you can add views to an account. So there's an account called Oxfam1, and this is the label, by the way. So this name is not stored in the core banking system, but it's stored as a label that you can edit via the API. All this stuff is API calls. So to add an account, to add a view, you'd be posting to the views resource. And then these are all entitlements on this view. So what you can do, so can this view add a comment? Can it add an image, the URL? Can it, there's a whole list of them, right? What fields, can it see the balance? Can it see the date of the transaction? Which alias would it use? So on and so forth. So this Sophie app is a good way to sort of just have a look around the data, see how you can use the views and entitlements. Once you've created views, you can give third-party users access to it. So if this is Susan's main account, there she is, and she wants to give access to Robin, who happens to be her accountant, then via this interface, she adds Robin and turns on the accountant view for him, and now he's got access. And again, this is all across the API. So if there's say there's a Akana API management platform. So I've just seen that they are integrating, wrapping Akana around Open Bank Project. So if they want to call the this view's creation via some bespoke management app, then they can do, because it's all API driven. Similarly with metadata, you can see that these are counterparties. This is in the sandbox, and you can add information about Argos, or a URL for the counterparties, and so on and so forth. So here's Open Corporate's URL. So that's one of the kind of principles to link to other sources of open data. And then we have aliases as well on counterparties. So if you want to share your transaction history with a wider group of people, but you don't want to show exactly the counterparty names, for instance, then you can have these aliases which are created by default, and you can edit them. So it could be, so if you want to share how much you're spending on software engineers, then you can just put software engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, but not have their names, and then you could. So I think with PSD2 coming in, and this greater access to data being mandated, and also later with the general privacy regulation coming in, it's going to be, we'll need mechanisms like this to show to different stakeholders different levels of data. And we built this into the core of the Open Bank. So here's the API Explorer. As you can see, you can select banks. What you log in. So this is an OAuth app, just like any other app. So is Sophie, by the way, the other app. They probably look the same because they've all been forked from the same code base. So this is running on using the same stack as the API itself, actually. But they're separate apps. They're all split up. So once you've logged in, you can select the bank. It will show you just the banks where you have accounts. Then you can select the accounts, the views. The default view is the owner view, and then you can make calls to the APIs. In a way, the idea is you could imagine that one day, maybe all customers will have this API Explorer onto their data, right? Why not? So we have an instance of Open Bank project connected to Temenos T24. That's that there. Just going through, selecting the view, transactions, and there are about 115 API endpoints. And maybe I should talk a little bit about versioning. So. All instances, so far instances of Open Bank project have versions going back to 1.2.1, something like that of the API, and we're on 2.1 now. The versioning is just clearly in the URL. You can up here you can filter by different versions, so you can see how the APIs has evolved over the different versions. So here's the call to get the current user, for instance, get accounts, get transactions. To register API key is pretty simple. Just register the app. You get your consumer key secret. So these two are used for the OAuth, and this one is used for direct login as well. Obviously, you could use any REST client. I'll show you that in a minute. We have some Docker containers. So there are actually, if you go to hub.docker.com/r/openbank project, there are a couple of Docker containers there, and one is using the sandbox, so Postgres backend, or maybe even H2. No, I think it's Postgres. And one is set up for Kafka. So in the props file of the OPP API, that's where we set the configuration. So that's where you can you can change the look and feel a bit of the portal page. So there's lots more down here, like it shows which API catalogs are available with links to the API Explorer. You can, in the props file, you can set a custom CSS for this, so you can totally have your own, or you can just do things like modifying this string and the logos which are here and colors and stuff like that. So that's what we do for banks when we're creating a sandbox for them. Basically customize it and then run it on EC2, something like that. So Docker. Docker. So you can either run it OBP full, which is running the API plus API Explorer plus Sophie in sandbox mode, or there's one that's running Kafka message queue as well. So if you run the Kafka one and you make requests to the API, then if you monitor the Kafka queue, you'll see messages coming onto the Kafka message queue, and probably not much happening on the API because it's just kind of waiting for a response. But there's also a Python project on GitHub somewhere which you can point at the Kafka message queue and then it will just send back some dummy data. So yeah, again, the idea is just to make it easy for people to try it. Be warned, it takes quite a while. I'm not sure what the current state is, but it was taking like over half an hour or something to build the get everything from Maven and build all the other stuff. Some banks that we've been working with include this lot and others which are not there right now. So so as I mentioned, we started doing these hackathons 2013, and more recently we've been doing like larger innovation programs. So we did one for Emirates National Bank of Dubai, brought a whole bunch of startups to London, also for UniCredit. We're working with a banking group in Korea right now, and they wanted to source startups from China. So if you know any Chinese fintech startups, please let me know, or get them to point them at us somehow. OP Bank, they're here. They were one in the audience. Yeah, we did a hackathon. One of two hackathons we did in Helsinki a few weeks ago.
Is there any Nordic banks? Is there any Nordic banks?
Yes, but not public, so I can't say now. But I'm traveling that way quite a lot. Maybe I'll just show you a few things in POR. Gosh, this is small. So POR is a REST client that I rather like. Let's see. Okay, so if you're wanting to use OBP API to start with, like fast, then direct login is the way to use it. And basically, you call this URL. So I'm running this locally, by the way. But you could also go to. Well, let me show you the sandbox as well. Hello, Ismail.
Hello.
Come back to check.
What to learn?
Oh, to learn. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's our general sandbox, API sandbox.openbankproject.com. So everything that I'm going to show you now, you could equally do it. You could do it there. So here's the URL. We're posting. We're creating a new login. And we need to send these authorization this header, which contains a password and a consumer key and so on and so forth. And then you make the request, and you get back a token there. That's the JWT token. And then you can use that in subsequent calls. So I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to copy and paste it because I think this is probably still valid. But I make the call using the. So now instead of sending my username and password, I send this token, and I get back who I'm logged in as. This is a call to get banks. So this is a non-authorized call, so anyone can call this get banks. The accounts that I have.
So I can get the Nordic bank from that?
What's that?
So I can get the Nordic bank from that?
No, because we haven't created a sandbox for them yet, and I haven't tested it on my local system.
There is OP, which is
I've talked about OP, but they're interested in another one.
Another Nordic bank.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I'm being coy. You know, you have to. Excuse me, I'm getting some water. You have to buy me a drink later or something. Yeah. So what's this called we've got here? So this is transactions. So yeah, each transaction has an ID, and we need that because we are attaching metadata using this ID. And this is something that some of the banks struggle to give. So in our core banking POCs, that's something that we talk about. We want account IDs, but we don't want bank account numbers as an ID, obviously, because these IDs are going in URLs, which will be cached all around the internet. So that's why we want UUIDs basically to go in that place. And to make a payment, we so in the sandbox, you can make a payment of type sandbox TAN, and so in the body you specify which account you want it to go to, which bank ID, which account ID, the description, and so on. And if I make it for a low value, then it should just go straight through. So there you go, it's completed, and so on and so forth. And if I make it a higher value, this is just how it's set in the sandbox, then it will send back a challenge, a challenge ID, and we have to use another REST call to answer this challenge. So the idea of this is like, typically, like in Germany, if you want to make a payment, you'll get a mobile TAN comes through on your phone, and you need to enter it in before the transaction will complete. So this is the idea of this kind of approach of you make a transaction request, and then depending on the circumstances, you might be redirected to you have to answer the security challenge basically. So in the sandbox, all these balances and so on are working. So it's like a super mini core banking system, but you can overdraw up to unlimited amounts. So, but obviously the same APIs work when connected to a core banking system, including the payments and so on. Yeah, any questions so far? Yeah.
The API Explorer which you showed actually had a drop down of all the bank accounts and stuff like that?
Yeah. Let me get up. So that's Sophie. So I'm logging in there as Sophie. This is going to take a while to load because during my experiment yesterday, I created. Oh yeah, you can see 22. It's like 1 million worth of transactions. So this is the API Explorer. So when you're logged in, before you're logged in, you get a whole list of banks, like everything which is on that bank or sandbox. And then once you're logged in, you get just the bank that you have accounts at, and then you can select the accounts, select the view. And the nice thing about this is that it's filling in down here. It's filling in some of the placeholders that you need. So without selecting those drop downs, then this would say Bank ID, and this would say Account ID. So it's just filling in those placeholder values for you. Then you can make calls to get the data back.
So does Explorer is having its own storage?
What's that?
Does Explorer have its own storage?
Not its own storage, but well, no. It's all this is going over the API, right? So it's I'm not. It might. I mean, it's a web app. I'm not sure where it's
you have
session.
a sandbox, so you know the bank list, right? You have a sandbox which it connects to.
Yeah.
But eventually there are 5 banks.
Yeah.
And for example, I might have 5 bank accounts in 5 different banks. So will it give me a drop-down list of all 5 banks the first time? The second time, sorry, after I've told it how many accounts I have and how many different banks. Getting what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. It's well, right. I mean, this is the API Explorer is just another web app which is consuming the API, right? And in fact, just a note on that, all this documentation comes from the API itself. So all this text that you see here is coming from the API. So I can just I can show you. So here's the Swagger. So that's what's driving the documentation. And that's what other API management vendors can suck into their systems to create proxies to this stuff. So back to your question, the banks list there is basically a list of once you're logged in, it shows a list of banks that user has accounts at, yeah? And otherwise it shows a list of all banks which that API instance has access to. Yeah? So typically, if you were going to be running this at RBS, right, and if they were running Open Bank project on their in their data center, the banks would probably be RBS, NatWest, Ulster Bank, and stuff like that. Yeah. So typically, you'd have the banks within the banking group would be listed on that API instance. Yeah. So we're not a platform. We do run a platform in Germany connecting to all the German banks, but that's not our A plan. It's not we're not intending to have a huge open bank project platform with all the banks in the world on. We want banks to put stuff. Install it at their data center.
How does your API know that which banks I have account in if they're not storing it?
Because when you log in, then we retrieve that data from the core banking system. We are actually storing these long account IDs inside the OBP database. Yeah, we have to store these account IDs because we are. We need that for linking to the views, for instance. Yeah,
because I might have different account IDs for different banks, so that has to be stored.
Yeah, we store these long account IDs, but we don't store account numbers. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. So there we are. There's the API Explorer. Maybe I can show the Sophie a bit. So I should have chosen another account, but so this little cogwheel can take you into the settings around the account and views and so on and so forth. So here is some metadata, so you can add like a narrative to the transaction. You can add comments. You see, there's one comment on this transaction, on this view. I can go to the. This is where I can create views like this. So here's my view here. Now I can, everything's turned off by default, but then I can say, okay, they should be able to see the bank account number. And that's it, I think. So then anyone who's got access to that view will just be able to see that little bit of data at the API.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Yeah, so that's Sophie. And then, yeah, this is my little toy from yesterday. So this is, let me just, can I explain what it does? Okay. So my point here with this, I don't know who saw the string quartet yesterday, but my point, the point I kind of wanted to make, apart from having a bit of fun, which is always a good idea, right, is to show that that REST and HTTP and JSON are like really ubiquitous, right? So I don't know if anyone's done anything with Max. Anyone used Max here? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So Max is like a programming environment for MIDI, yeah, and then later they added audio as well, and it comes out of the early 90s, something like that. It was some of its development was done in AirCam in France, so where Pierre Boulez did his good stuff and all that. Anyway, so I wanted to show that look, there's even a music program basically can make REST API calls. You know. So what we have here is this is like some pitch detection going on up here, and then it's coming down, and then actually there's a whole bunch of cabling which I kind of, yeah. So basically it's detecting which notes are being played and maybe which sequence. So if you play an C and then an C and then an E in sequence, then it detects that. And yeah, and then basically depending on which notes, then it's making a couple of calls to the API. So this is get banks. You can see it's whenever it's flashing, it's making a call. There's a max object called max URL, and then it's calling this URL. So here's the one that's getting the current user. It's getting banks. What else is it doing? Probably this one is not good because I had 4 mics for the quartet. So right now we've only got 2. But yeah, it's making a call to the API, and this is the response code. And then based on the response code, it's sending MIDI here. And these things are using direct login, so I can show you. So that doesn't need any authentication, so there's no headers because it's just get banks. But this does. So it's kind of hard coded right now. But here's the direct login token, and that's what's being sent. So yeah. So sometime yesterday I just did a login. I think it's this one here. It's doing the login. There we go. So that's why direct login is like super easy to use. Yeah, there's no OAuth bouncing around and redirects and all that kind of stuff. Let's see if I can get some sound out of this actually. This is going. So I'm playing a synthesizer here. Oh. Sound. Oh. So. Yeah, so here we are. So yeah, I experienced yesterday the first time, I guess, ever with having a API-driven feedback loop. You know, so that's kind of it's kind of a feedback loop actually, I suppose. If everyone was really quiet in here, then it would kind of die down. Yeah, okay, there we go. I think I'm done, folks. I hope that was of entertainment, you know, and you learned something.
Thanks, Simon. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Do you have?
Yeah.
Just one very quick one on your toy.
Yeah.
Obviously, there could be potential outside of just having a play, right? So where you've got a pay button there. And the use of voice recognition and tone in order to authorise payments.
Yeah.
Do you see that being a viable factor that could be used in isolation, or do you see it needing to?
Well, I think it's good that such a toy kind of makes those questions pop up, right? Yeah, that's the other purpose, apart from showing that like HTTP and REST and JSON is ubiquitous. You know, that it just makes you think about those types of things, right? Yeah. You know, that you could authenticate, you could have to whistle to, you know. Yeah.
Probably wouldn't work when you're drunk, though.
Might not work if you're drunk. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
How long is the typical timeline for banks to choose open bank project and to get the first API on that? And
Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, we still don't have a production one, right? At the moment, we don't. But I would say the timelines are squishing together. It's like some kind of concertinas going, you know. So, like the lead times used to be like really, really long, didn't they, Ismail? We used to sort of, the lead times used to be very, very long, and now it's much, much shorter. Yeah. And like banks are expecting, you know, like, well, matter of weeks really, before you know that they want stuff.
And the typical sort of process that we suggest is, or what we call the open banking journey, is basically 12 months in total. So starting with 2 months for like a sandbox and running hackathons. And sandbox does not include any, as Simon has showed, no integration. And then after 2 months sandbox, we do 3 to 4 months in our experience of integration with the back end of the bank. And then we do a 6-month period for a pilot. You know, where the users access real data, so it's production data, but for a limited number of apps and a limited number of apps, of users and apps, sorry. And after that you can go in a public rollout. And of course that's the typical sort of phase. Of course you can, like some of the banks we work with, they do not necessarily want to have a pilot phase, for instance, so it's much shorter for them to go into production. But typically 3 to 4 months to connect to your ESP.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is that like yeah, some banks are coming to us, and you know, like the hackathon is second. They want to get the core banking integration done, you know, and then do a hackathon type thing. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so that's good. That's nice for us.
But like what we usually suggest is that, you know, these hackathon things and innovation can run, can work in parallel with the production. You don't have to wait until all your APIs are there in production to actually start publicizing your API program.
Yeah. So what we're going to see is like probably that banks have got Open Bank Project Sandbox and a properly connected instance, you know, but they won't get rid of that because people can play around with that.
Sandbox is a super important element of any API program because it helps you build the community, it helps you test, experiment, it helps you build support internally. So it's really a key component of any API program. I think you had that question as well.
Regarding go-to-market strategy, are you planning to work with partners that help you integrate in banks or things like that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
we're open to that.
We're
Thanks.
definitely open to
Thank
that.
you. That's it. Right, any other last question? All right, well with that, thank you everyone. This is the last question, just like a very short closing. I know we all want to go back home, so just wanted really to thank you. A big thank to everyone who came for the 2 days. This is the closing of API Days. We hopefully looking forward to meeting you next year, probably at the same time, probably the same venue, talking about more stuff around banking APIs. We have a hackathon this weekend, so from Friday 6 p.m. at Hub Westminster. You're very welcome to come, again, as a visitor just to see how it works, or as a hacker participant. And we will send all the presentation, all the videos. You'll get that via email if you're registered. And what is there anything? Oh yeah, API Days Paris. That's happening in 13, 14 in Paris. So it's 1,200 people. It's not organized with us. It's not with the Open Bank project. It's Mehdi organizing it, but you're very welcome to join that as well. It's not going to be around banking, but about APIs in general. With that, thank you everyone. Thanks for keeping with us, and see you around.
Thanks
if you have any questions, we're here to help. Thank you.